The style Mal played, hard rhythm player. Malcolm was a very strong, very confident the way he played. Stevie does the same thing. I mean, we all grew up, we were the same kind of...
Angus Young is the man who breathed life into every heartbeat of rock and roll, keeping that fire burning for over half a century. If you've ever listened to Back in Black, seen a small figure duck walking madly across the stage, or felt your blood boil from the very first guitar note of Thunderstruck, then you've already entered his world. Angus is not just a musician, he's the embodiment of unwavering loyalty to music, the eternal engine of AC/DC, one of the greatest rock bands of all time. While others shifted styles or chased trends, he remained true to himself, one SG guitar, one schoolboy uniform, and a passion that never compromised. But behind those furious riffs lies a more complex life, a childhood marked by poverty in Glasgow, early struggles with unknown bands, the heartbreaking loss of his brother, and a private life defined by solitude. In stark contrast to the explosive energy he brings on stage, his off-stage persona is quiet, reserved, and intensely focused. This is the story of Angus Young, the smallest man in rock, yet perhaps the one who made it roar the longest. Angus MacKinnon Young was born on March 31, 1955, in Glasgow, Scotland, a bleak, industrial city where children grew up among coal smoke, shuttered factories, and tough streets. His family lived in a modest house at 6 Skerry Road in the Cranhill district, a working-class area plagued by high unemployment and schoolyard violence. Angus was the youngest of 8 siblings. His father, William Young, served in the Royal Air Force during World War II and worked a variety of blue-collar jobs, while his mother Margaret, a devoted Jewish woman, kept the family afloat in a house with no heat, no fridge, and often only one full meal a day. Life was harsh, but music was always present. His older brothers Stephen, Alexander, George, and Malcolm all played music. George would later become a successful producer and member of the Easy Beats, while Malcolm would become Angus's closest musical ally and co-founder of AC/DC. Angus's first instrument wasn't even a guitar. It was a banjo his brother George had restrung to help him start learning music. Later, their mother managed to buy him a battered acoustic guitar, scraping together what little money she could because she understood that music might be their only way out. Angus never received formal lessons, just a single session with his brother Alexander. From then on, he taught himself by ear, locking himself away in his tiny bedroom, practicing for hours until his fingers bled. In a cold, noisy world, the guitar became his refuge. In 1963, when Angus was just 8, the young family immigrated to Australia. It was a desperate move driven by survival. Glasgow had just suffered its harshest winter in history, and Australia was advertising for working-class families to relocate. With little more than a few suitcases, they landed in Sydney and were temporarily placed in the Villawood Migrant Hostel, a collection of cramped, steel huts that later became a detention center. Despite the harsh conditions, music once again became their salvation. George Young formed the Easy Beats with fellow migrant Harry Vanda, becoming Australia's first major rock band. George's success ignited a fire in his younger brothers, especially Malcolm and Angus, quiet, observant boys who became unrecognizable when they picked up a guitar. The family later moved to Burleigh Street in Burwood, and Angus attended local schools, though he never found a place in the classroom. Aside from art class, he felt out of sync with the school system and dropped out at 15. He worked odd jobs, at a slaughterhouse, at a printing press, and even had to deny a strange rumor that he'd once worked for an adult magazine, saying dryly, "I only printed letters, not people." But every spare moment outside of work was spent with his guitar. In those years, Angus developed his signature style, tight, punchy riffs that hit like a hammer. He played with small local bands like Kentucky and later Tantrum, where he began mastering stage presence, rhythm, and raw performance energy. Though these early bands never broke out, they laid the foundation for what was coming. The real turning point came when Angus and Malcolm joined the Marcus Hook Roll Band, a studio project that would eventually lead to the birth of AC/DC. From those humble beginnings, Angus Young carved out a legacy that would define the sound and spirit of rock and roll for generations. The Marcus Hook Roll Band was a short-lived but pivotal project for Angus Young, involving his older brother George Young and producer Harry Vanda. Although their album Tales of Old Grandaddy was a commercial flop, it served as the Young brothers' first real doorway into the professional music world. Then, in 1973, one night over casual conversation, Malcolm suggested to Angus that they form a new band. Without hesitation, Angus agreed. The name, AC/DC, was spotted by their sister Margaret on the back of a sewing machine. It stood for power, electricity, and non-stop energy, fitting, since none of them realized they were about to create one of the most explosive bands in rock history. At that time, Angus had no signature image. He experimented with various stage costumes, including Spider-Man, a cowboy, and even a spoof superhero named Super-Ang. But it was Margaret who proposed the idea that would define his look forever, the schoolboy uniform. At first, Angus wore it just to attract attention, but it became his lifelong trademark, a visual symbol of the childlike chaos and electricity he brought to the stage, wielding his guitar like a lightning storm. AC/DC's first song, Can I Sit Next to You Girl, was recorded with original vocalist Dave Evans but failed to make a lasting impression. Everything changed when Bon Scott joined. With his raspy voice and rebellious spirit, Bon gave the band its true identity. Alongside him, Angus, armed with his old Gibson SG, schoolboy outfit, Chuck Berry-style duckwalk, and electrifying stage presence, became an irreplaceable force. In 1975, AC/DC released High Voltage in Australia. No one expected that an album by immigrant kids playing raw riffs and reckless lyrics would fire the first shot in a global rock revolution. From a restrung banjo in a tiny bedroom to high-voltage performances in packed arenas, Angus Young had begun his journey toward becoming a rock legend. AC/DC was never a band built to appease radio stations. They didn't write love songs or complex harmonies. Their music was stripped down: guitars, drums, a voice like a revving engine, and a whirlwind named Angus Young. From High Voltage, 1975, to TNT and Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap, the band pushed the boundaries of hard rock using a deceptively simple formula: few chords but maximum energy. While other bands pursued musical complexity, AC/DC chose raw instinct, and that became their trademark. In 1976, they signed with Atlantic Records, but initial reactions from executives were lukewarm. The sound was considered too loud, too rough, chaotic, and unsellable. Fortunately, producer Phil Carson believed in them. Without his gamble, AC/DC might have vanished before truly taking off. Then came Let There Be Rock, 1977, and Powerage, 1978. In Let There Be Rock, they turned biblical scripture into a rock manifesto. And the man said, "Let there be sound." And there was sound. Powerage elevated rebellion into a sonic punch, not with punk's gloom or prog rock's sophistication, but with thundering rhythms and a middle finger to the norm. Angus Young remained the band's beating heart. While Malcolm laid a foundation solid as concrete, Angus was the spark, unpredictable, scorching, explosive, the screaming soul of a well-oiled machine. Highway to Hell, 1979, marked their international breakthrough. With meticulous producer Robert "Mutt" Lang at the helm, the band was pushed to perfection, each part played dozens of times until every sound was razor-sharp. The result was a classic. Songs like Girls Got Rhythm, Shot Down in Flames, If You Want Blood, and the immortal title track, Highway to Hell, felt powerful enough to blow out speakers. But with every peak comes the risk of a devastating fall. On February 19, 1980, tragedy struck. Bon Scott, the band's fearless frontman, died after a night of heavy drinking, passing out in a car in London. It wasn't just a death, it was a wound to the band's soul. Angus was shattered. He didn't speak to the press or issue statements. He simply disappeared, as if he'd lost a part of himself. AC/DC was at a crossroads: disband or be reborn. They chose to carry on, not for fame or sales, but because, as Malcolm said, Bon would have wanted us to go on. So, Angus and the band recruited Brian Johnson, a vocalist from the band Geordie, whose voice could scream like thunder but still carried deep emotion. What came next would define the legacy of AC/DC and Angus Young for decades to come. Lyrics into bullets, straight to the soul, the legacy of Angus Young and the fire of AC/DC. In the storm-lashed Bahamas studio, where thunder cracked and lightning lit the sky, Angus Young looked out and said, "That's Bond opening the show from hell." Out of that atmosphere of grief and electricity came Back in Black, a funeral album in disguise. Its cover was plain black, no images or gimmicks, yet inside lay the greatest farewell ever made to a fallen bandmate. Hell's Bells began with a tolling bell, its riffs heavy as iron. You shook me all night long, married raw seduction to explosive energy. Shoot to thrill, charged forward like a speeding bullet. And then there was Back in Black itself, its tight, aggressive riff carving a monument in rock history. The album sold over 50 million copies, becoming the second best-selling album of all time, second only to Thriller by Michael Jackson. The 1980s and 1990s saw the rise of glam metal, grunge, and industrial rock, but AC/DC didn't chase trends. They dropped For Those About to Rock in 1981, Fly on the Wall in 1985, and The Razor's Edge in 1990, all with the same tight, hard-hitting, no-frills sound. Critics accused them of repetition, but Angus Young gave one of the most legendary comebacks in rock. They say we've made 11 albums that all sound the same. That's wrong. We've made 12. Through it all, Angus never changed. He still wore the schoolboy uniform, still wielded the same Gibson SG, still duck-walked like a kid skipping class with thunder in his hands. As the world evolved, Angus stood still, and people kept turning to look. After 8 years of silence, AC/DC returned in 2008 with Black Ice, topping charts in 29 countries. Its world tour grossed over $440 million, one of the most successful in music history. In 2014, Rock or Bust was released, shadowed by loss. Malcolm Young, Angus's brother and the band's co-founder, had been diagnosed with dementia and stepped away. But Angus carried on, now the last standing warrior of the original lineup, leading the band into uncertain terrain. Angus Young never chased glory, he dragged it behind him. For over 50 years, he never changed his sound, his stance, or his spirit. And somehow, that made him more enduring than anyone else in rock. But with endurance came tragedy. Malcolm Young was never the face on the album covers or the voice belting into the mic, but he was the heart. The one who built every AC/DC track from the inside out, every riff, every drum line, every beat. He and Angus could read each other with a glance, communicate with a nod. "I don't care what the audience thinks," Angus once said. "I just look at Malcolm. If he nods, I know I'm doing it right." But in 2014, everything began to crack. Malcolm started forgetting lyrics, chords, things that had once been part of his very being. The diagnosis: early onset dementia. A disease that doesn't just steal memory, but the person themselves. Angus watched it all, day by day. What hurt wasn't just death, it was watching his brother disappear piece by piece. Malcolm eventually left the band. Stevie Young, their nephew, stepped in, not to replace him, because no one could, but to carry the name forward. Angus kept playing, kept duck-walking, but off stage he grew quieter. He avoided the press, rarely spoke of Malcolm, not out of coldness, but because there were no words big enough to express that loss. Malcolm passed away on November 18, 2017, at age 64. There was no media circus, just a quiet, solemn announcement from the family and band. Angus didn't write a lengthy tribute. In a rare interview, he said just one line: "Losing Malcolm, it felt like I lost an arm." Yet Angus didn't let that grief silence AC/DC. In 2020, he reunited with the remaining members, Brian Johnson, Phil Rudd, Cliff Williams, all of whom had once stepped away. Together, they made Power Up, not as a new beginning but as a tribute. The track, Through the Mists of Time, plays like a letter, never naming Malcolm, but echoing with his presence. See your shadow in the night / feel your spirit in the air / walk with me through the mists of time. Every note was Angus speaking to Malcolm, even if the world couldn't hear his brother's voice anymore. In a music world filled with scandals, reinventions, and drama, the bond between the young brothers was something rare. No theatrics. Just blood, loyalty, and guitar strings that never broke. No vows, just a quiet devotion that lasted to the very end. Angus Young never set out to become a rock icon, but through his wordless pain, unshakable loyalty, and the dignified silence he maintained in the face of loss, he became something irreplaceable. He is the younger brother who continues to play not for fame or glory, but to keep the soul of his fallen brother Malcolm alive. On stage, Angus is a blur of energy, duck-walking, head-banging, swinging his SG like he's summoning thunder. But when the stage lights go down and the applause fades, he retreats, not to celebrity parties or lavish indulgence, but to his quiet, introverted life far removed from the chaos of rock and roll. Angus married Ellen van Lohem, a Dutch woman, in 1980, right at the height of AC/DC's first global peak. They met through a mutual friend in Europe. There were no tabloid scandals or over-the-top public declarations, just a simple, enduring connection that has lasted over 40 years. The couple has no children, avoids red carpets, and rarely appears in the public eye. Ellen prefers privacy, and Angus honors that completely. To him, real love doesn't need an audience. They divide their time among 3 homes, a villa in Kangaroo Point, Sydney, a house in Alton, the Netherlands, Ellen's hometown, and a modest apartment in Glasgow, where Angus grew up. Each place is designed for peace, not prestige. Their home in Alton, personally designed by the couple, includes a studio, a reading room, a sprawling garden, and a wine cellar that remains empty, because Angus doesn't drink. Despite being the face of one of rock's most electrifying bands, Angus Young has never touched alcohol. While his bandmates wrestled with addiction, accidents, and rehab, Angus stuck to chocolate milk and tea. The only addiction he's ever battled is cigarettes, something he's never quite been able to give up. He doesn't drive much either, even though he owns a remarkable collection of vintage cars, including a 1930s Bentley 4.5-liter, a Ferrari 458 Italia, a Rolls-Royce Phantom, and a Ford Model 48. Each one is steeped in history, just like him. Offstage, Angus avoids attention. He's not on social media. He rarely gives interviews. He doesn't appear on talk shows. Instead, he lives quietly, as if half of him exists only behind the curtain. He paints with oils. He listens to jazz, especially Louis Armstrong. And in a quiet room filled with family photos sits his first Gibson SG, darkened, sweat-warped, worn by decades of devotion, but never sealed in a glass case. To Angus, success isn't about sold-out arenas, awards, or record sales. It's about staying true to yourself without having to explain why. And that's why, while the world may see him as an icon, he still sees himself as the kid in the schoolboy uniform, just playing loud music with his brother. In an era when most artists fight to stay visible, Angus Young did the opposite, and became unforgettable. The quieter he became, the more the world refused to forget him. At 69, Angus still isn't slowing down. No memoirs. No farewell tours. No deals to sell his music catalog for retirement. Instead, he straps on his Gibson SG, puts on the old-school uniform, and storms across the stage like he's racing against time. In 2024, AC/DC returned for the Power Up Tour, their first since 2016. After years marked by illness, loss, and lineup changes, Angus led the charge with a reunited group: Brian Johnson, Phil Rudd, Cliff Williams, and Stevie Young. They played massive stadiums across Europe and North America: Wembley, Croke Park, Berlin, Rome, before tens of thousands of fans, both lifelong diehards and younger generations raised on streaming services, but still electrified by the opening riff of Back in Black. On stage, Angus doesn't speak much. No rants, no long dedications, just the guitar doing the talking. And after all these years, his SG still sounds like thunder, tight, raw, and unapologetically loud. On March 31, 2025, he turned 70. There was no media spectacle, no awards show celebration. Just Angus, back on stage in Minneapolis for the opening show of the next leg of the Power Up Tour. Still in the same faded schoolboy outfit. Still playing the same old SG. Still duck-walking like time never caught him. The tour continued through iconic American cities, Arlington, Nashville, Pasadena, before returning to Europe in June, with shows in Prague, Berlin, Madrid, Paris, and a final stop in Edinburgh, the ancestral home of the Young family. At 70, Angus Young still hasn't stopped. Not because he has to prove anything, but because somewhere, in every thunderous chord, his brother's spirit plays with him. Angus Young continues to defy time, playing full 2-hour sets each night with no breaks and no slowing down. Even as the band now performs with newer members like Matt Logg on drums and Chris Chaney on bass, Angus remains the fire guiding AC/DC, standing strong beside familiar faces like Brian Johnson, returning after hearing treatment, and Stevie Young, Malcolm's nephew, on rhythm guitar. Yet when the stage lights fade, Angus disappears into the shadows once more. Still living between Sydney and Alton, still absent from talk shows, still off social media, his presence is now felt more in grainy backstage footage than glossy headlines. And somehow, that absence makes him feel even more present. What sets Angus apart is not reinvention, but consistency. For 51 years, he's never left the band he helped found. No solo albums, no side projects, no shifts in sound or image, just the same uniform, the same Gibson SG, and the same furious passion. While the music world evolved around him, Angus stood still, and because of that, he endured. His legacy isn't wrapped in awards. Though AC/DC was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2003, ranked 72nd on Rolling Stone's list of the greatest artists of all time, and called the 4th greatest hard rock band by VH1. Those honors never defined him. To Angus, the real reward is that decades later, people are still learning his riffs in garages, bedrooms, and dive bar stages all over the world. He was never a technical wizard. Angus doesn't shred with 40 notes a second or flex exotic scales. But he knows how to make 3 chords explode. His playing made music feel possible, not distant or elite. It made the kid with a cheap guitar believe they could burn just as bright. And that's real power. Not just being great, but inspiring others to believe they can be, too. Angus brought rock back to the streets, where it belongs. While many of his contemporaries have retired, passed away, or faded quietly into the background, Angus Young still stands, still plays, and still looks into crowds of thousands with the fire of someone on their first tour. He never needed interviews to remind us of his name, because we never forgot. He doesn't need his legacy rewritten, because he never stopped writing it. He became a legend not by trying, but simply by showing up every night, for over 50 years, with the same heart, the same sound, and the same refusal to fade. In a world that has outgrown much of rock's wildness and sincerity, Angus is living proof that the spirit still breathes. He's the last heartbeat of an era, no speeches, no pretensions, just pure, raw, unrelenting music. One day, maybe, he'll step off the stage for good. But even then, his riffs will keep echoing. In dorm rooms, in garages, in the headphones of the lonely, in the hearts of those who aren't young anymore, but never grew old. Because Angus Young doesn't just play guitar, he keeps the fire of rock and roll alive in a world that's almost forgotten how to burn. And maybe you've felt that fire too. Maybe you've blasted Back in Black on a sleepless night, or duck-walked across your room with a fake guitar, or felt your blood pound at the sound of Thunderstruck. If you have, then you already know, you didn't choose rock, rock chose you.